and welcome to the Bald Ambition podcast. I am your bald host, Mookie Spitz, and I have a bald one here with ambition, Mr. Todd Kolm. Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Mookie. It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Todd is a digital strategist and innovator, and we've crossed paths for at least 15 years in the industry. And I hear that Todd has a secret. He's waking up these mornings and he is not caffeinating. So I thought I would energize him with an early morning podcast to get this innovator motivated for us. Is it working, Todd? Is this a good substitute, or at least a sufficient one for no caffeine for you?
Absolutely. This is very stimulating without the jitters, and it's great. I've been doing that for about a month without caffeine, and I'm surprised how easily my body is adjusted. How I'm waking up and not really needing it, not really missing it. The first couple days were tough, but honestly, morning stimulation like this is definitely enough to get me going through the day for sure.
You are raising the bar because I am a coffee achiever. It's my drug of choice. And now I've got a double whammy. I've got a podcast with you to stimulate my brain and a nice brewing espresso. So let's see if I can keep my act together with all this intensity.
Awesome.
Todd is also one of the bald minions, as I was hinting at, or semi-bald. You do have the flavor saver facial hair, so
I feel I need to have hair somewhere. So thanks to gravity, it's moved further south to the bottom part, the lower hemisphere of my face.
That's right.
Yes.
I think your cerebrum is in overdrive, so it just pushes
It,
the follicles out.
that's right. I've always said it's the hair on the inside that matters. So,
Terrific. So again, thanks for joining us. And the one elephant in the room is the trunk I'd like to yank on as we start, which is AI.
hmm
AI. You can't scroll LinkedIn without that being central to everyone's bio. We've had the AI revolution pretty much since ChatGPT, November 2022, and yet that seems to be everyone's pedigree all of a sudden. There's not a company that doesn't have the .ai suffix attached.
yes.
And you and I have been working in digital strategy for quite some time. So, how are you navigating this AI world, which seems to be on the balance beam between hype and hope, and much further along on the Gartner hype curve than anyone really would have imagined? There's a lot going on. So what's your point of view on this revolution, and when do you think it'll make the impact everyone claims? And are we, in fact, a little bit further than people might even think?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. It's not even the elephant in the room. It is the room these days, and it is pretty pervasive. I mean, I've met people who have touted their AI experience going back, who are not in academia or in research, who have touted their AI experience going back years and years and years. And I'm thinking, how's that really possible? Of course, AI has been around, conceived of since the late '60s and '70s, but it's in reality, as you said, ChatGPT was a seminal moment. I think I think it's really important to parse the sort of separate the wheat from the chaff on this, and that is, you know, it's great that everyone's excited by AI. I think it's also important to sort of revisit what problem you're trying to solve as a business and as a customer and as a user, and then recognize where AI can fit. AI can definitely play a lot of roles. It can contextualize, it can simplify, it can remove frictions, it can make life easier. Those worrying AI is going to replace them. There are certainly some fields where it will. I mean, if you've ever been in a Waymo, there where there's the lidar array and the self-driving car element of it that's picking you up and creating kind of a conversation-free experience. AI is driving you to where you want to go, and that's pretty cool. I mean, that's in practice now on the roads. In certain cities. In that case, if you were a rideshare driver, AI is a real threat to replace you. Aspects of life as creatives, people are certainly their roles are threatened or will be changed by AI. in many ways. In many cases, it's great to kind of create tissues or early mock-ups of a concept, instead of taking hours to design it yourself. And I think that's great. But until copyright and laws and things like that catch up, right now that will not really find its way to the light of day, despite what Coke did in its, I think, it's Super Bowl commercial, which was very weird. I don't remember if that polar bear had like extraneous limbs or some other kind of genetic defect. So I think it is definitely pretty far on the Gardner hype cycle. I think it's important to just again recognize what problem you're trying to solve, and I've always put the technology as the last mile, not the first mile. So it's very easy to fall into the trap where it's the solution in search of the problem, but you got to be really clear on what the problem is, and then make sure if you want, AI is maybe one of your sort of Iron Chef ingredients you mix in, but it need not be the only thing. And it's certainly just, it's not an AI recipe. It's a business recipe and a customer recipe that then might have AI as a seasoning or as an ingredient.
Yeah, as a strategist, that's the endemic challenge, getting clients, sometimes even colleagues, not to leap to what we would consider a tactical solution. How many times have we been with clients and the first thing out of their mouths within 5 minutes is, should we do a YouTube channel?
Right, right.
So
That's right.
so now it's a precondition that AI will have to be central to whatever initiative we're advocating. And that is the cart before the horse, as you're mentioning. And the essence of consultative selling, of doing good strategy, is to first do that discovery,
That's right.
isolate the pain points and challenges, align that with the ostensible goals of whatever it is that needs to get done, and then extrapolate from there rather than leap to these tactical conclusions, inclusive of even a revolutionary technology like AI.
That's exactly right. And so the problem or what we're experiencing is that the technology is so promising that those sort of worn and tried and true tools of like this process can ultimately be overwhelmed by this excitement and enthusiasm that this can do everything. It is finally, we've worked in life sciences and pharmaceuticals. This is finally the panacea, right? Someone's cracked the nut. There's a wonder drug that can do everything, and that is called AI. And it is not true, but it's easy to fall victim to that. And so the traditional approaches, which were sort of, in place from the Stone Age, still work and are important, but they're easily overwhelmed by something that is so promising and so shiny.
That's
And it
right.
is that,
And
yeah,
knowing when to take that bright, shiny object and apply it
that's right.
within the life cycle of a drug, of a treatment, or even of a digital campaign. There
That's
are
right.
areas where AI is better suited than other milestones within that campaign. Prior guest was Noriko Yokoi, who is the co-founder of 3 Cubed AI. She's got the AI in there, but I think she deserves it because she has identified the touch points within the content production cycle where AI, the agentic model, can actually work. You take core content and then you repurpose it by channel, which
Mm.
is a fairly mechanical process. If you have your core content, let's say for a campaign, you have core imagery, and you need to repurpose it, let's say for a particular sized advertisement or outreach, then AI might currently be an excellent candidate for doing that. But if we're talking about creating empathy with patients, if we're talking about outreach and optimal methods for, let's say, educating individuals about a disease or about a diagnosis, AI can certainly help, but the human peer-to-peer component is essential. It's foundational.
I just, you're so right, Mookie. I just came from a conference that was focused on sort of the future of medicine, and AI was, of course, a very pervasive topic of discussion there. And what resonated consistently, and this gave me a lot of promise, is that AI can do the things that take up a lot of physicians' times, and we all know they live in this sort of bureaucratic administrative state that none of them signed up for to get into medicine, but most of them found themselves in. it could take those burdensome tasks, simplify them so that physicians can do what they did sign up for, which is practice medicine in a humanistic manner. And I think if AI can do that and allow them to go back to sort of the Marcus Welby sort of high touch engagement model, then I do believe that it's a very effective tool. The question is, it's only as good as our ability to recognize what it can do and our ability to actually let it, put it in its right lane and in its proper lane. And I think I'm given a lot of hope by those who are the futurists and are starting to actually put that into practice. There are 50 or 60 companies that were there exhibiting and presenting that were doing just that, really trying to ensure that empathy is human delivered, but it's the stuff that doesn't require as much humanity that AI can do that it does do, and that's a hopeful state.
Absolutely. The point of care is ground zero for that. I have a primary care physician friend. We go all the way back to high school.
Mm,
She always knew she wanted to be a doctor. She became a doctor, and she spends, by her own admission, 90% of her time staring at screens,
mm, mm,
the EHR,
mm,
asking mechanical questions, being basically an input operator.
mm.
And imagine a point of care world, and I'm sure at the conference they covered off where AI is listening and transcribing, dynamically making recommendations and referencing ICD codes and doing all the administrative function in the background to
That's right.
free up the physician to actually make eye contact with a
That's
patient.
that's
So
it. That's
I
it.
think there's epic potential there, and similarly, AI from this agentic point of view can simplify tasks, heighten efficiency, remove the burden of humans having to do things that machines are better suited to do.
That's exactly right. It's an amazing accelerant, enabler, contextualizer, all of those things. But it is really, like you say, it's terrible as the interface between people to humans in that regard. And
Right,
that's what, honestly, there's a tool in the medical field that is perfect for that. That is nurses and physicians and doctors.
right,
So let them do that and let the back office stuff be done.
right, right.
By computers.
And speaking of the human touch, the ghost in the machine, another guest I had was Jill Strickman, and she is the founder of Real People, Genuine Real People.
Mm,
And she finds and vets and manages real patients and real physicians for campaigns,
mm,
educational initiatives, advocacy initiatives. So, how do you build trust? How do you create empathy peer to peer?
yeah,
You need people. You
you
can't have a
absolutely need people.
machine to do that. And by analogy, what we do with clients is to make that human connection, is to build trust, to kind of input their empathy so that we provide solutions which aren't necessarily mechanistic or air quote strategic, but we're connecting with clients who have a real need, who are kept up at night by business problems that we ostensibly solve. So, can you talk a little bit about your client service side of the house? You're a brilliant guy. You've done keynote presentations. You've got a lot of breadcrumb thought leadership behind you. Uh, Tell us a little bit about the importance of this human connection when you're doing high level strategy and deep clinical stuff. But it's about looking someone in the eye and fist pumping and
Yeah.
making them feel good.
I that's a excellent question, and I have what I hope to be, and I believe to be a really relevant example of that. About 10 years ago, I was working at a digital health company, and we had a client take us on as a to solve a challenge. This was a 150 plus year old German based global pharmaceutical company, so steeped in tradition, still lived in its, still based in its tiny little German town that it founded
Yeah,
in.
yeah,
And they had a goal. They wanted to replace reps, the field force that called on physicians, inside of 3 years. So they wanted to go from 0 to 3 and then phase out reps and go completely digital engagement. So in a sense, they wanted to remove the human interface between this company and its customers from the equation. And so one of the
And what
things that
was what was their rationale? Set it up
they're,
like just
yeah,
save money. That's
right,
obviously a yeah.
right, save money, and in a sense, the mindset was we are 150 years old. We're pretty stodgy. We move behind the times. We're going to leapfrog the competition by becoming a digital first company, and we're going to be the first one to kind of go truly rep free and revolutionize the space, and others will want to follow in our tracks. We're going to go from sort of the laggard to leader in a one felt swoop.
Yeah,
Was sort of the rationale.
from alchemist to AI, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
this was before the AI revolution
Right.
as we know it, right?
Right.
But the notion of going rep free, a lot of companies have dabbled, and some have started up that way when they're a very small kind of single molecule company. It's a little bit easier. So one of the first things we said was great. I assembled a team. We created an innovation lab to test and learn, and we had some hypotheses. And one of the hypotheses was sort of challenging a little bit of the client's mindset, which was that reps play an important role in doctors' lives, and they're not easily replaced by technology, including the empathy aspect of it, the human connection. And that was not a popular opinion, but it was a hypothesis. So we said, let's go out and prove it. Let's do research. Let's do primary research on your customers in your markets. And so we did ethnography for your audience. That is sort of day in the life research, kind of like what the Office show was sort of based on. But obviously, that was a little bit sillier and a little bit longer. But this was with 2 hours in office with a physician, and then 2 hours at their home. And the idea was to understand what their lives were like and where reps played a role in those lives, and what opportunities would be for digital to be more pervasive and more convenient and replace some of that if possible. And so we did
And
that in. Oh, go ahead, please.
how did you do that qualitative research? Did you follow the docs around?
Yeah,
What did you
yeah.
guys do?
So we did this in the U.S., in um, Italy, and in Spain. Were three markets that they picked for us, and we picked primary care physicians, and infectious disease specialists, because they were in the pulmonology space as well, and cardiologists. So those are three specialists. And we followed them around, and we spent time in office. And one of the things that we found really fascinating was the human side of them. Even if it didn't pertain to the reps, and when it didn't pertain to the reps, you learn about the humans who were behind who were the HCPs. For instance, in Spain, in Madrid, we met a young physician of GP just starting out, and we were in his apartment, and we noticed he had no furniture, and he was basically set up on boxes or sitting on the floor, and had a little kind of table that was kind of on like it was almost like a Japanese steakhouse kind of style. He was just sitting on the floor. And we said, "What? Why do you have no furniture?" But he had an incredible array of artwork up. He said, "Because I'm a doctor, I'm supposed to be doing well. I'm supposed to have art." And he bought art and didn't had no money left, because he wasn't, primary care in Spain and Europe doesn't really pay a lot. He didn't have the money for furniture. He prioritized art because that's what he thought he was supposed to do. And when we came to patient care, we found he was living in the realm of what he thought he was supposed to do, than how he naturally was wired as a human. So just learning some of those inclinations was really fascinating. We met a physician in the head of an infectious disease ward in Italy, in Rome, and he was this incredibly brilliant man, slightly older guy with a gray beard, and he let us in. He met us in myself and the interpreter. I do not speak medical Italian, so I know about as much as Brad Pitt did in Inglorious Bastards,
Right.
Buongiorno and
Yeah.
Arrivederci or whatever. And so he let us in, and we watched. I sat in the examination room. This is what kind of access we got. The interpreter and myself were in the patient room while they were getting examined. An older woman. She was really scared. She had some symptoms I didn't quite follow, but the physician just touched her cheek, and she was put at ease. And then at one point she asked about me, because I wasn't an Italian speaker. He asked me to leave. to make her more comfortable. The ethnographer stayed because she was a native speaker. I sat in the lobby, and what was fascinating is sitting in the lobby for a little while, watching all these other patients line up and waiting to meet with him. Two reps came and pounded on his door. And while he was meeting with this woman that he had a very high, engaging relationship with, high touch relationship, quite literally, he let the reps in. And he put her aside for a minute and met with them for about 20 minutes to listen to them detail on the
Yeah,
science.
talk about a different culture.
Absolutely, it was fascinating. So we're
Yeah.
thinking this man likes human connection, and he obviously we just whatever. What was so fascinating about this man, on top of that, was when we were done, the plan was so we spent 2 hours in office with him, and then we were going to transition to his home and actually drive with him to his little countryside villa. And as we did this, instead of his white cloak, out came this old man with a cane walking, and the ethnographer said, "Come on, let's go." And I thought, "Why are we following this guy? Where's the doctor?" She said, "That's him." And he was hunched over, and he was completely a different person. I did not recognize him as the same man. And she explained to me that he had been in a paragliding accident or a small plane accident in the like 30 years ago and broke his hip. He damaged his eye socket. He was badly injured, and as a result of that, the wind failed him. And so now he committed his career to helping patients harness their own wind, like with pulmonology. It was so
All
poetic.
right.
It was
Right.
insane.
Inspirational,
Right.
right?
And
And
he also, when he was in uniform in the white coat, he didn't need a cane because he was a superhero to his patients. He wanted to be. He was in uniform and costume, and yet when he was taking it off, he was very frail and fragile. And it was just so fascinating to see the complexities of the human condition represented in physicians. And again, as we went through this process with a whole array of individuals, learning more about them, a woman in Milan who became a doctor because her father and brother were architects, and they didn't think a woman could be an architect, which of course is total bunk. But she proved them wrong by saying, "Look, I got my certificate. I proved myself that I'm worthy of this career, and you guys can't be this because you're not qualified." So just she became a doctor out of revenge and
right.
proved
Good for
worth.
her. Good
So
for
all
her.
these fascinating stories. But what we found at the end of this research, Mookie, was that humanity was so important. The empathy was so important. These were people who were consistently at the top of their class. They were competitive. They were sitting there dealing with patients all day who complain to them, and they take the toll of that. So here's a rep coming in maybe a couple every couple weeks, every month or so to visit on them, and they're not here to complain. They're here to listen. They're here to talk. They're here to hear exclusively for them. They're loading up their cars and sometimes driving hours to see them. That meant a lot for their ego, and it was almost a recharging of the batteries. And we so in that
Fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, so we couldn't respectfully meet the client's demands of getting the human out of the equation. So we had to find technology solutions that surrounded them to allow them to minimize their field force, while also ensuring empathy was at the center. And technology, like we were talking about AI, took some of the grunt work out of the mix and simplified their tasks, but allowed humanity to shine. So that when they were engaging, it was the most meaningful engagement possible. But the frictions of the experience that of connecting with that company were minimized through technology. And
So
that
it's
was a Oh, go ahead, please.
no, please go ahead. That's great.
Yes. So it was a really good lesson, and honestly, it was so valuable. Like again, it's always great when your hypothesis gets borne out through research, and we did it in a way that we ensured it wasn't going to be biased, it wasn't going to be self-serving, but it was so rewarding to see that you cannot replace the human in the discussion of medicine effectively. You can find other pathways, you can rewire around them, but you cannot extract them from that circuit board. Otherwise, there won't be a processor there. And I think that in that regard, that was such a rewarding experience. And so I have such fond memories of that with my team and going and doing that research. We brought the clients with us to some of these locations, and it was just such a rewarding experience. So when we talked earlier about AI, the parallels here are so strong. Again, there's a place for humans, and there's a place where humans can easily be replaced, and I don't think too many will complain. But you just don't take the human completely out of the mix. Otherwise, you will end up with a very cold existence, and we need warmth in this world to stay connected and stay engaged. Even those of us who are who are seeking caffeine replacement therapy. So
That's right. And an interactive sales aid could not possibly be a substitute
right.
for that human touch. And what's fascinating is we tend to lump what we would consider the HCP, the healthcare professional, as this clinical, usually patriarchal
Hmm.
father figure,
Yes,
traditionally, who has all the answers, is impartial and objective, and dispenses medicine. And what your research so vividly revealed is not only are they human, each their own individual, but they fall into these discernible segments where some are very emotional, very patient centric. Others might be a little bit more clinical and analytical. You had the younger doctor who put a sense of pride and accomplishment above all else. He had to demonstrate to himself and the world that he had fine art on the wall to again prove that he was a physician, he had arrived.
that's right.
So humans have different motivation, different intentionality, and being sensitive to that is what really makes any kind of service industry work. So the robots can't replace it. They can help, they can
That's right.
augment the experience, but you can't just swap them out without dehumanizing the entire enterprise, which at its core is human.
That's exactly right.
And it's interesting to think about that within the context of the world as it's evolving now. So caffeine aside, that sense of being thrilled by the humanity of it all, trend with me for a second. We're at this singularity, like Daniel Kraft has been talking about forever. We're heading toward the quantified self,
Yes.
at the convergence of healthcare, communications, and technology. What should folks be aware of? And what gets you most excited about working in healthcare strategy?
I mean, you mentioned two words that I've been a real advocate of for a while, and I'm really excited to see that moment is here, which is quantified self. So I think what COVID proved out during that period where access to healthcare was somewhat limited. Thankfully, the government sprang into motion and took away some of the regional barriers that allowed telemedicine to really prosper during that time. But what really happened then was the digital health community sort of jumped into motion, jumped into action, and filled a lot of the gaps in access. What we're seeing now is this incredible sort of democratization of data and a lot more sources of data that allow for early indicators and more what's called digital biomarkers of conditions. So the more curious and I would say technically savvy consumer user. I don't want to call him patient because patient is it projects sort of sick mindset versus a health mindset, but can actually start to understand their own health in a much better way without going to a doctor at all. And I'm not saying you should never go to a doctor, but you can start understanding your own sleep patterns and and what nutrition is doing to your health. There's now the pervasiveness of the patch that you can wear to actually track your glucose levels and be able to see how your body is handling your A1C. You don't need to be a diabetic patient to do that. So I think it's really exciting to see this trend to say, like, I've just eaten this meal. What's my glycemic index? Quite literally, why am I getting sleepy after this meal? Oh, because I'm carb crashing. I'm going up the hill and coming right down. I think in that regard, that trend is very exciting for the practice of medicine because it doesn't mean you're saying to your doctor, I know I've got this. You shouldn't say, I know I've got this, but you could start to recognize what events are creating the need to go to a doctor versus starting to understand your own feedback loop for your own health. And I think the more we get our own data and our own instruction manuals on how to use that data for our own health management, I think that the more we're in control of our own fate. And I think that's really, really exciting. As we look at some of the other aspects of it, the communication from there is you can start communicating some of the signals you're seeing. Like for instance, this conference I went to, there was one of the sponsors gave, thanks to one of the sponsors, everyone got this arterial blood pressure cuff that actually uses, AI technology and a few other sort of biomarkers to track your blood pressure, your arterial blood pressure, which in the past you could only get by sticking this giant needle in your arteries and actually tracking to see what the general elasticity of your arteries. And I actually, went back to my hotel room and I tried that out, and I found out some of my, the signals that were given were a little bit mixed. And I got concerned, and I brought the readings in to my doctor when I had a next appointment, and we went through and came up with a plan based on that. If I didn't see that, that wouldn't have given me a flag. It wouldn't have led to that conversation, and I might not have been able to course correct. So the data's always been there. We just haven't been able to see it. Now the data's, now there's even more data, and it's much more directed, and it's much more contextualized for us. And I think that's the part that I find to be really, really exciting. And that is leading to the singularity, right? Because it's allowing us to contextualize the information, to have more of it, and to be able to act on it, or to have some type of intelligence that allows a tool to act on it for us in some capacity.
Yeah, the average human body has something like 37 trillion cells.
Hmm.
That's 37,000 billion
Yeah,
cells,
quite a
of
few.
which a big percentage aren't even our own.
Mm,
So we have all of this digital exhaust
that's
that
right.
just goes completely unmeasured. And this is at the cellular level, the endocrine level, everything from hormonal regulation, equilibrium, to the metrics like you described, blood pressure, A1C. The list goes on and on for all of these markers. And for decades, we've been aware of this evolving biometric technology. And with the advent of mobile phones, the iPhone in particular, the sensors that are available, the meme was floating around the interwebs only a few years ago that you had the old Radio Shack catalog with
Right.
25,000 retail items, of which a vast majority are all on the iPhone
That's right.
in
All the
terms of apps and functionality inputs and outputs. I wrote a monthly column for Pharma Forum, which was the EU's big pharmaceutical communications blog. Paul Tunna, editor in chief over
mm,
there. And together we were tracking the evolution of apps and
mm,
mobile technology. And much of this was anticipated. We knew it was a question of when, not if. And we've crossed some of our wildest speculative flurries with real technology. And
yeah,
this opportunity to really measure the human body and analyze that data is not only unprecedented, but just the tip of the iceberg. And that could really be transformative, not only for physical characteristics of the human body, but as you were hinting at, behaviors. If
that's
you have an
exactly right.
app that can track your motion day to day, and through machine learning technology, the essence of AI, find patterns. And if there's a deviation in that pattern, it could even alert emergency medical services, hinting that you might have suffered a stroke. So the list goes on and on, but let me bring up the one big challenge of this. 23andMe declared bankruptcy this month,
Yes.
and I was one of no doubt a tsunami of customers who yanked their DNA information from the database because you
Mhm.
tacitly assume who knows who is going to
That's right.
buy that company and where your genomic data is going to. So there's an epic privacy concern that underlies all of this. Interoperability challenges in health IT systems. This is the real source. It's not just the technology, but data is power. Power is money. And this sense of sharing data is foundational to accomplishing the quantified self goal that you're hinting at. How do we overcome this hurdle of privacy privacy concerns fueled by the monetization of even personal health information, coupled with the need for interoperability, the personal need for convenience and real-time diagnostics. What an opportunity, but what a lingering mess.
Yeah.
How the hell can we get over this hump?
I mean, it's a huge question, and let me remind you, I'm not caffeinated, so that's a big, big question, a big challenge.
Yeah, and I'm
First of
kind
all,
of putting the burden on you to
no,
solve
I
what would
appreciate that.
ostensibly be
Well,
a $10 trillion
no,
industry,
right,
but
right. If I could crack
yeah,
this nut,
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think I'd need to work again. Let me just start by saying that I was a 23andMe customer as well, and let me also just say that 23andMe said I was low probability of baldness. So
Yeah.
I do find some of their
Hashtag fail.
exactly.
Conversely, I had a high probability of baldness, and I was kind of like, duh.
That's very funny.
Tell me something
Yeah,
I don't know. Right,
exactly.
right.
So one thing, just sort of the adage that I've always sort of considered, especially in recent years, was if a product if a product is free, then you're the product. So in that regard, if something, if you're using an app and it has no price attached to it, then they're absolutely using your data. And I don't want to say that so categorically, but there's a high likelihood of using your data, and usually pouring through the privacy policy will bear that out. Well, by the way, a really good use case for ChatGPT is copying and pasting privacy policies in, or providing links to them and asking it to simplify that language and explain it to you. Privacy
That's a
policies.
great use.
Yeah,
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 put in the boilerplate of
that's
the
right.
2 point font stuff that you're
It,
exposed to,
yeah,
and see if there's a hole in it.
yeah. The density is the goal of those. Is it's so dense that no one will read them. But that's the kind of burden a large language model is great at, right? And will do for you with ease, with aplomb. I think in regard in regard to that, I think you really do need to make trade-offs and decide and caveat emptor there. I think looking at the value exchange. What am I getting for this? What kind of data do they need? I do fall into the sort of the vortex of generally trusting Apple and their privacy claims, just given all the public stances that they take against sharing data with police forces and FBI and other institutions. Sort of gives you at least confidence that at least their PR department is working well and communicating their privacy stance. So if you're sharing something with Apple HealthKit, um, then and you decide how you want to permission or what you want to permission about that data with a third party app that integrates with the Apple Health Kit, you're in control. You don't have to share everything about yourself. It gives you chances to peel off. So, for instance, that blood pressure cuff I mentioned, I wanted it to share. I wanted it to see a few attributes to me, but it didn't need to know everything about me. And I picked and chose what I wanted it to see. And I did scan through its privacy policy, and thanks to ChatGPT, I felt comfortable about it. I think being aware of, like, what am I going to get for this, and what might I give them in return for that is just sort of an evergreen statement that I'll make. But that doesn't mean companies like 23andMe don't go belly up and don't have privacy policies that give them a little bit of wiggle room, and you're then in some vulnerability. I think the reality is that a lot more is known about us out there than we would like to we know and we would like to know. And so I think getting down to personal data like that, it's definitely your data and you own it or would like to own it. But I do believe you have to be mindful that it's really, really hard to lock yourself down unless you're not in the digital world at all. And that's
Yeah.
the real trade off. I know people who I have a good friend from growing up who still keeps all his passwords in a notebook and things on a written spreadsheet kind of written out, and that's great. I mean, he uses a computer in some regard for work and other things, but I think his goal is to protect his financial life from that, and I do suspect that even despite those discretions, he's somewhat vulnerable.
Yeah, I have a somewhat contrarian point of view. that I'd love to share
Yeah,
with you.
yeah, I'm always good for a healthy debate.
For years, when the internets was first getting going, the idea of getting into a stranger's car was anathema. It was something that our moms warned us against, and now we're taking Ubers. The idea of staying in a stranger's home. I mean, who
Mhm.
would ever think of doing that, let alone
Right.
paying for it? We've got Airbnb. And meeting people online who you don't know who they are, and you just connect based on some superfluous and shallow profile information, and you go on a date hoping for some kind of relationship. Unbelievable. Put pictures of your kids on a social network. Are you insane? There's been this buildup, progressive buildup of convenience and what we would consider human interoperability, overcoming concerns about privacy and information. And if we're to realize that quantified self dream that you've outlined, I think we need to go even further and, in a sense, throw our arms up and say, here's all my personal data down to the minutia of my physical habits so that the AIs can analyze any kind of aberration and warn me of a stroke or a myocardial, can give me better advice about exercise, can even improve my dating success or failure because it can see trends in the people that I've selected or the people who have selected me. So, the brave new world of an integrated, ubiquitous, quantified self reality is contingent on transparency. And I see that as inevitable. And I don't know how to protect us from the dominion of either the world destroying AI or the oligarch or the corporation that owns us through our data. But there's an inherent contradiction between the opacity of personal information and getting our information to actually do everything that it could for us.
Yeah,
And I think transparency, just like AI, is it's inevitable. It's gonna win. So part of me is like we could take these precautions and be selective of the companies we share information with. I think Apple has done a great job of branding itself as safer, just like Volvo used to.
right, 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 right.
But I also call bullshit. And I think that this inevitability could be healthy. I mean, no pain, no gain. We need to open ourselves up and reap the benefits and almost keep our fingers crossed because otherwise we're just going to remain siloed and in the dark.
Yeah, I don't dispute anything you're saying, and I don't want to sound like we're actually, that is, I wouldn't say that's a contrarian view. You're probably a few years ahead of the thinking I outlined, which is to say, as our technology, especially our smartphones, evolve more, the processing power allows for more on storage, on device processing for AI. So you're going to have more local AI. You're going to have literally AI in your pocket that does not call to the cloud, and thus it's as private as anything you would keep in a
That
personal.
is a great point. Great
Yeah.
point.
So as we get to
Yeah.
that, I think the
Yeah.
concerns are
Right.
mitigated. It doesn't mean there aren't concerns, but unless you lose your device and it's hackable, well, then you've got other problems too.
That's a
So
wonderful point. It was brought to life really by DeepSeek, the Chinese company that upended the entire industry,
right,
including the hardware aspect, this
right,
January. That
that's
for
right.
1/100th, 1/1000th, the processing power and cost, they had trained a large language model, boosting many of our own models to the point where you could put an LLM, a full service, full blown, fully functional Chat GPT brain on a laptop.
That's right. That's right. And that's going to be
Boom, boom. So
right.
you bring up a brilliant perspective about how to how to balance this need for ubiquitous, transparent, personal information with the capacity to silo it from the mothership.
That's
I
right.
think I think that that's a fascinating perspective.
Yeah, so you know, you gave a nice nod to the our friends from the Tandy Corporation of Radio Shack, all the components that were in the iPhone. The processing power of the first iPhone was greater than the space shuttle.
Oh, by
You know,
far,
by
yeah,
far,
yeah.
right,
I
and that
I
was
think
only
the lunar lander
yeah.
on the moon was 8K.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah,
we're talking now this exponential improvement. We're already seeing, while it's been a failed rollout, Apple Intelligence is promising more capabilities. It's still going to be cloud based, but more of it is moving to on device. And I do think that the world you've described, where transparency allows, has some assured protections, but also all the virtues can be reaped by the user and permissioned as selected. That's not far away.
yeah.
People are certainly doing that now at their own peril. I'm a little bit more cautious, but I'm doing it selectively, and I would love to be more holistic. I'll just say, coming back to tie a few strands from our conversation together. I'm a big quantified self, and one of the devices I love is the Aura Ring. I don't know if you have
Yeah,
one or
I'm
wear one, but
familiar with that.
yeah,
I'm familiar with that.
what's great about it is it tracks your sleep, it tracks your temperature, it tracks your heart rate variability, it tracks your stress, it tracks your fitness, all of these things. And while it doesn't have human level empathy, if it sees you've had a poor night's sleep, it'll actually adjust. Unlike the Apple Watch, which no matter what is, let's say, default 500 calories a day is your goal, whether you've had a terrible night's sleep or laid up from an injury. This will actually adjust your caloric goals, activity goals each day, depending on how you've done before and how well you slept. So it has an
Yeah,
inherent empathy engine in it to say,
yeah.
like, we're not going to continue assuming all things are equal. We're actually going to read your data and contextualize it as if a person were behind the scenes here doing that. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that multivariate analysis is
That's right.
integral. We're holistic creatures, and
That's right.
our systems are all interdependent. That's one of the failings of a lot of this technology to this point, where you're getting discrete data sets that aren't integrated.
That's
And
right.
we're an integrated creature. Our sleep, our food, our sex, our attitude, all
Right.
tied together.
That's
Mind
right.
and body are one.
That's right.
And any kind of future tech needs to take a similarly holistic perspective. And that could very well be, to tie a knot on the whole AI thing, the road to artificial general intelligence, this
That's right.
mythical AGI.
Right.
I think part of the problem in terms of how people think about this is they look at it similarly, discretely, and analytically. That by rearranging lines of code, a conscious entity is going to pop out. And if there's any truth around us as humans, we're not only interconnected, mind and body, but consciousness itself is an emergent phenomena. It's a meta phenomenon.
Mm.
It's existing as its own kind of thing. And I think for us to get to AGI, it needs to evolve analogous to how we evolved. You're not going to have any super coders or agents coding other agents who are going to code other agents. That's a bottom up approach. And I think it could happen that way, but a much more likely way we're going to arrive at that brain in a box, the conscious HAL 9000 machine
Mhm.
that can think and act creatively, that could mimic and in a sense be conscious, analogous to us, is by just having this thing roam in the wild, either through simulations or robotics. There needs to be interplay between the world, lived experiences,
Yeah.
and AI. And
I
I think that's relevant from what you just said about just taking in data from all the sources and understanding how the mind and body works.
Well, look at what large language models are. It's literally just mining a trove of research of data and creating like deriving secondary research. We talked earlier about ethnography. It needs to be able to do its own ethnography. It needs to be able to track patterns of behavior from humans in a primary source. I don't know if you remember this. A couple of 10, 15 years ago, there was born out of Canada. Our virtuous friends to the north. They had this friendship robot that they created that was going to be
It
troving
was
or
nice. It was nice.
it was right. It was very friendly, right? Eh?
It was nice.
And it would go around to different cities in North America and basically be an ambassador of peace and of friendship. And it was a really interesting idea, and it was also supposed to learn some behavior. What's hilarious, by the way, is that it got decapitated in Philadelphia. So it was completely beaten and dismantled. Which is
The city of brotherly love.
right,
They
which is
just
so on brand. But
they kicked its ass.
right. But the notion of sending around something, or even just like gathering primary research and understanding human patterns and literally walking in human shoes somehow, some way, would allow for general AI to be more possible. Because I don't trust coders to who are oftentimes wearing a hoodie and drinking Soylent and staying up and
Yeah,
all know it's right to
yeah,
them.
yeah.
My son's a computer engine in electrical computer engineering, but I wouldn't trust them to be able to be the agents of empathy and of humanity, to embed that, to imbue it with those attributes.
Yeah,
I wanted to.
intentionality, right? It's
That's right.
that the ongoing debate between Steven Pinker and Daniel Dennett, where
That's right.
Steven Pinker was like, I even met him in person, and there was a big
Mm,
conversation around AI, and
mm.
I yelled over to the group, intentionality. And then he broke the conversation with the circle, looked at me and pointed, no.
Nice,
So
nice.
Pinker doesn't think you need intentionality. You
Uh,
don't need empathy for
mm,
consciousness. And
mm,
Daniel Dennett was on the exact opposite side of that, which is all about intentionality. We
yeah,
have lived experiences and real goals that you,
yeah.
you try to accomplish. Otherwise, it's just a probabilistic transformer model, which is
That's
what
exactly.
the LLMs are. The most sophisticated LLM model now, the frontier model Trailblazer, likely has an IQ lower than your house cat,
Mm,
probably far less than that, and zero, absolutely zero self awareness.
yeah.
So, that's something to factor in this AI excitement, which is baby steps, folks.
I
It could be utterly transformative next week, but we still have a long way to go. The growth curve is logarithmic here.
you're so
So
right.
it's going to take some work.
Totally. I was actually on that note. I was playing around with ChatGPT 4.5 yesterday and was having a conversation. I asked it to tell me about myself. I don't know if you've ever done that. If you've
Yeah.
ever asked it, and it's really fascinating. And then because I'd recently turned off its memory, it said, "I don't know a lot about you. Tell me about yourself," and asked me a few prompts. And I made up some silly responses to that. And it started to have like a its version of ironic, sort of silly banter with me. And I shared it with my son, who happened to be home from college, and it was checked it out, and his immediate response was, that's interesting, but that's soulless. And I think that's sort of an analog for its consciousness. It lacks sort of this the human soul of what makes us truly who we are. And I don't mean that in a spiritual sense. I just mean that in like that human element. And
Yeah.
um, it,
And
it it was it was a very I was impressed with its conversation and its attempts at wit, but
yeah.
in practicality, it was a bit off.
Yeah, you're bringing 30, 40, 50% of that intentionality into the
That's
conversation
right.
by being a sentient, conscious, intentional entity
Right.
conversing with a machine.
That's right.
So, when you watch a movie, a big chunk of the movie is what the filmmaker did not put in because you're using your own imagination
That's
to
right.
fill in the blanks. And that's why I think, remember that Google programmer who went bonkers and claimed that the chat bot was sentient?
Yes.
And
Yes.
then and
Yes.
then concluded that there was a conspiracy to hide that
Yes.
reality from the
Yes.
public. Well,
Yes.
the guy was a little bit bonkers, but he was projecting his own will onto
That's
a
right.
bot in a way that convinced even himself that he was talking to an entity, and you know that's easy to do, but we still have a ways to go,
Yes.
and it's exciting to think about. And I think just to put a bow on the bow, we're talking about alphanumerics now, and I think this is relevant for our quantified self conversation. A lot of people think about these AI bots and the revolution all in terms of keyboard interface. I have a good friend who calls ChatGPT chatty, and she has the audios
Hmm. Hmm.
setting. So she's talking to Chatty. I asked Chatty about the potato salad recipe, or
Hmm.
I asked Chatty about my business model at my agency. So Chatty is her buddy.
Hmm.
But that's the next step, which is the her kind of Scarlett Johansson voiceover
Yes. Yes.
companion. And beyond even that, it's the robotics. You talked about the Waymo self-driving car. The data that's being fed into these models isn't just written and symbolic human communication. It's the inputs of what we see and what we hear. YouTube contains probably by now trillions of hours of video.
Right.
The LLMs are slurping that up too. This our world isn't a world of text. That is the
That's right.
one-dimensional representation of human consciousness and experience.
I,
So that we forget that. We think
I
about these chat bots as chat bots.
that's
But
right.
if you're talking about AGI, it is the full dimensionality of human experience, right?
Right. And what's fascinating too, going back to the Waymo again, is the notion of having to have some kind of code of ethics, and the notion of like what happens if there's a crowd of people and
Yeah,
you can't
make that
avoid.
decision. Kill
That's
kill
right.
the mom and the baby,
That's
or
right. The
take
trolley.
out the bus full of
That's right.
elementary school
The
kids.
trolley problem, the old conundrum, right? And just being able to code that in for a split second decision and have that hard coded is fascinating and also horrifying at
Right,
the same time.
right. Well, we're giving them an awful lot of power.
That's exactly right. And by the way, they're already on the roads.
Yeah, it
So,
is creepy. I haven't been in one, but a friend sent me a video of sitting in one,
uh,
and it's just what you mentioned early on in this pod, that's a visceral example of this technology being truly transformative.
it's an introvert's dream to not have to get in a car and not have to speak to someone.
Right. And imagine the revolution that the self-driving cars will bring. It's all that commuting time that we retake. And then cars, who's going to own a car when you can summon one? And then why summon a car? You could summon a gym if you want to work out during your commute. Summon a bed if you want to get in another hour of sleep. Summon a working office environment where you can get to work already. Summon a home entertainment
Yeah,
car. They're going to
yeah,
be just rolling chassis with interspersed and interplaced modular tops, right?
that's right.
It's going to
Yeah,
be a completely different world, and bring it.
I totally agree.
And
Really
no
exciting stuff.
traffic, because the
That's
brain
right,
is
because
going
they'll
to,
communicate with one another. There'll be
yeah, and
invisible
it'll be, even
rails,
if
and
you're going 15, 20 miles an hour, that's better than sitting at a standstill because of a gaper's block.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So this has been awesome, Todd. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining. We're going to have to bring in the third bald one, our mutual friend Bob Brooks,
Oh,
and then we'll be the Trace bald guys talking tech, talking healthcare comms,
right.
talking
Talking.
about what kind of salve we put on our noggins to make them nice and shiny. He gave me a whole recommendation about all this cocoa butter.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
A
Bob's a
big-
big moisturizer. I hope I'm not
He's a
embarrassing him, but
huge
he
moisturizer
he.
guy.
I think we once on business shared a hotel room when we were at a company that working together, and times were lean, so we economized. And I remember him once saying, leaning over, and it was a little bit like the scene from Airplane where the pilot says, "Do you like gladiator movies?" He's like, "Do you moisturize?"
I know that's
That's Bob
the
Brooks,
Bob
and
Brooks KPI. Do you
yeah, it's
moisturize your
you
bald
moisturize,
head?
and then I will concede I did not, and now I do. So I'm probably late
Yeah,
to the game.
yeah, yeah. He made recommendations. I did my Amazon order, and life has never been the same.
Nice,
So thanks
nice.
so much for making time, Todd. I appreciate it. Maybe we can jump on the pod in 6 months or a year to see how things have changed
Yeah, we'll see if our
and
predictions come
and
true, and
and,
it'll be
and our
exciting.
next steps in our own career evolution as well, which is like how we move with these changes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me here. This
Excellent.
has been awesome.
Thanks so much. And thanks for listening to Bald Ambition. Like, comment, share, and leave a little message. There's a little hyperlink in the description if you want to contact me or Todd. We'd be happy to hear from you.